Listen. I am Mama Otomba, and I still remember the first night I heard the dead man sing above the sound of the rain on Lenox Avenue. Harlem was wet that evening, soaked in tobacco smoke and trumpet music, the kind of rain that made the street lamps bleed gold into the puddles. Men in long coats hurried past the clubs with their collars raised high, women stepped carefully over the broken sidewalks in satin shoes, and somewhere deep in the night a saxophone cried like a widow mourning beside a grave. I was younger then, though already old enough for the neighborhood children to whisper that Mama Otomba spoke to ghosts. Perhaps they were right. My grandmother had carried old desert spirits with her from the coast of West Africa, and my mother taught me the language of bones, ashes, smoke, and dreams before I learned how to write my own name. Back then, I lived above a barber shop near 133rd Street. My apartment smelled of sage, old books, and the oils I used during spiritual cleansings. Jazz musicians came to me often. Harlem in those days was filled with men who played their trumpets like they were bargaining with God himself. They carried too much sorrow in their hearts. Some came asking for charms against bad luck. Some wanted powders to keep jealous lovers away. Others wanted protection from spirits they had awakened through drink, loneliness, and midnight music. But none frightened me like the singer named Isaiah Blue. The first time I heard his name, it came from a trembling trumpet player called Curtis Moore. Curtis arrived at my apartment close to midnight, drenched from the storm outside. His hand shook so badly he dropped his cigarette twice before he could light it. I remember the fear in his eyes more than anything else. Not fear of police. Not fear of gangsters. A deeper fear. Ancient fear. The kind men carried when they believed heaven itself had turned its face away from them. Mama Otomba, he whispered, I need help. I told him to sit beside the coal stove while I brewed coffee with chicory root. Outside, thunder rolled across Harlem like giant drums. Curtis kept staring toward my dark hallway as if he expected someone to appear there. Finally I asked, Who follows you? He swallowed hard before answering. A singer. I laughed softly then. Musicians fear singers now? But Curtis did not laugh with me. You don't understand, he said. Nobody can photograph him. Those words settled strangely in the room. I had heard many superstitions before. In Harlem, people spoke of women who turned into birds at night, men who carried curses stitched inside their coats, children born with the sight of death in their eyes. But I had never heard of a man who could not be photographed. Curtis reached into his pocket and placed several photographs on my table. They were taken inside the Paradise Room, one of the largest jazz clubs in Harlem. Smoke clouded the images. Musicians stood beneath bright stage lights. Trumpet players. Drummers. Piano men, crowds drinking and dancing. And in the center of every photograph there stood an empty space. Not darkness. Not a blur. An empty shape exactly where a man should have been. I stared at the photographs for a long while. The camera broke, I said quietly. Curtis shook his head. Every camera breaks around him. He explained that Isaiah Blue had appeared in Harlem only 3 weeks earlier. Nobody knew where he came from. Some claimed he arrived from New Orleans. Others said Chicago. One old drunk swore he saw Isaiah step off a ship from Morocco, carrying nothing but a silver watch and a black leather Bible. But wherever the singer came from, he brought crowds with him. People packed the Paradise Room every night to hear him sing. White businessmen crossed downtown after dark just to sit in the club and listen. Women fainted during his performances. Hardened gangsters wept openly into their whiskey glasses. Curtis said Isaiah's voice sounded unlike anything human. Deep and smooth one moment, sharp as broken glass the next. Sometimes listeners swore they heard multiple voices singing beneath his own, as though invisible spirits harmonized behind him. Then what scares you? I asked. Curtis leaned closer. People disappear after hearing him. The coal stove crackled softly between us. At first nobody noticed, he continued. A drunk musician gone missing. A waitress who didn't come home. Harlem swallows people every day. But now... His voice trembled. Now it's happening too often. He told me of a piano player named Vernon Tate who vanished after performing beside Isaiah for 6 nights straight. Then a dancer disappeared. Then a photographer from a downtown newspaper vanished after trying to take Isaiah's picture backstage. "The police think they ran off," Curtis whispered. "But I saw something last night." He stared into his coffee cup for several seconds before speaking again. After the final song, I followed Isaiah outside through the alley behind the club. I thought maybe he was mixed up with gangsters. Maybe blackmail. Something ordinary. Curtis wiped sweat from his forehead despite the cold. But when he reached the alley, the shadows started moving around him. The rain tapped gently against my window. He wasn't alone, Mama. There were shapes walking beside him. Tall shapes. Thin as smoke. I could hear chains dragging across the ground even though the alley was empty. I said nothing. Then Isaiah turned and looked straight at me. Curtis lowered his voice to barely a whisper. His eyes were silver. A silence settled between us after that. I rose from my chair and walked toward the shelf where I kept my grandmother's spiritual things. Cowrie shells. Black candles. Dried roots wrapped in red cloth. I took down a small carved wooden figure no larger than my hand. Its face had been worn smooth with age. "My grandmother crossed the Sahara with this idol hidden beneath her clothes," I said. "She once told me there are spirits born in deserts where no prayers survive. Spirits that feed on memory, music, and grief." I looked toward Curtis. Such spirits cannot easily cross oceans. They need human vessels. Curtis stared at me with pale, frightened eyes. "You think Isaiah is possessed?" "No," I answered slowly. "I think possession would be kinder." Thunder shook the building so hard dust drifted from the ceiling. Then from somewhere far below on the wet Harlem street, I heard singing. Not loud singing. Soft singing. Smooth and low like velvet, dragged across a razor blade. Curtis froze instantly. His coffee cup slipped from his hands and shattered against the floor. Because the voice below my window was singing a song no living man knew. A burial hymn from my grandmother's village. And I had not heard it since childhood. The moment that song drifted through my window, every candle in my apartment went dark at the same time. Not one after another. Altogether, the room fell into a blackness so thick it felt alive, and for several long seconds neither Curtis nor I moved or spoke. Outside, the rain continued falling over Harlem. But even the sound of the storm seemed distant beneath that voice singing in the street below. I could hear each word clearly, although the language belonged to a village buried deep beneath desert sand half a world away. My grandmother once told me those songs were never meant for the living. They were sung only when a spirit refused to leave its body behind. Curtis whispered my name, but his voice shook so badly I barely recognized it. I walked slowly toward the window and pulled the curtain aside just enough to look down onto the street. At first I saw only rain and reflections from the neon club signs glowing across the wet pavement. Men hurried along the sidewalks with hats pulled low over their faces. A taxi rolled through the intersection spraying dirty water against the curb. Then I saw him standing beneath the street lamp across from the barber shop. Isaiah Blue. He wore a long black coat untouched by the rain, and a gray fedora shadowed most of his face. But I could still see his mouth moving gently with the melody. The strange thing was not that he stood there singing. The strange thing was that nobody else on the street seemed to notice him. People walked directly past him without turning their heads. A drunk man even stumbled through his shoulder as though Isaiah were made of smoke. Yet the singer remained perfectly still beneath the flickering yellow light. Then slowly, very slowly, he lifted his eyes toward my window. Silver. Curtis had spoken the truth. Those eyes did not look human. They gleamed like moonlight reflecting off river water at midnight. And when Isaiah smiled at me, every mirror inside my apartment cracked at once. Curtis cried out in terror as glass shattered across the walls. I stepped away from the window immediately and grabbed the carved wooden idol from the shelf beside my door. My grandmother had warned me never to hold it during fear because spirits could smell terror the way wolves smell blood. But that night my hands reached for it without thinking. The wood felt warm against my palm. Too warm. Down below the singing stopped. Silence spread through the room. Heavy silence. The kind that presses against your ears until you begin hearing your own heartbeat. Then came 3 slow knocks on the downstairs door of the barber shop. Curtis stared toward the floor beneath us. Knock, buddy. Knock. Knock, duck. He knows I'm here, Curtis whispered. Another 3 knocks echoed upward through the building. I closed my eyes and listened carefully. No footsteps. No breathing. Only those deliberate knocks followed by silence. I told Curtis to stay inside the apartment no matter what happened. Then I lit a black candle beside the hallway entrance and sprinkled white ash across the doorway. Old protection ritual. Older than Harlem. Older than America itself. My grandmother called it the sand line. Spirits crossing it revealed their true nature. The knocking downstairs stopped the moment I finished the ritual. For several seconds there was only rain again. Then slowly I heard footsteps climbing the staircase toward my apartment. Soft footsteps. Patient footsteps. Curtis backed against the wall like a cornered animal while I remained near the candle holding the wooden idol tightly enough for my fingers to ache. The footsteps stopped directly outside my door. Then came a voice smooth as dark whiskey. "Good evening, Mama Otomba." Hearing my name spoken by that voice sent coldness through my bones. Not because he sounded threatening. Because he sounded familiar. Like someone remembered from a dream long forgotten. I did not answer him. Outside the door, Isaiah chuckled softly. "Your grandmother once sang beautifully beneath desert stars," he said. Her voice pleased the old spirits. Curtis looked ready to faint. Sweat poured down his face while the candle flame beside me bent sharply toward the door as though pulled by invisible wind. "Leave this place," I said quietly. Another soft laugh came from the hallway. "You already know I cannot." Then silence returned again. I waited several moments before slowly approaching the peephole. The hallway outside stood empty. No footsteps descended the stairs. No doors opened below. Isaiah Blue had vanished. Curtis stayed with me until dawn because neither of us trusted the darkness outside. We sat beside the stove while Harlem slowly woke beyond the windows. Newspaper boys shouted headlines in the streets. Church women hurried along sidewalks wrapped in coats against the cold morning drizzle. Yet neither Curtis nor I spoke much after what happened. Some fears become larger once spoken aloud. Just before sunrise, Curtis finally asked the question, sitting inside both our minds all night. "What is he?" I stared into the dying stove fire before answering. "Something old." Later that afternoon I traveled to the Paradise Room myself. The club looked different during daylight. Smaller. Sadder. Empty whiskey glasses still covered the tables from the previous night, while cigarette smoke lingered deep inside the curtains and walls. A tired bartender polished glasses behind the counter when I entered. The moment I mentioned Isaiah's name, the man's expression darkened. "You another reporter?" he asked. "No, good," he muttered. "'Cause reporters keep asking stupid questions around here." I sat near the stage, where musicians usually played after sunset. Even empty, the room carried strange energy. I could feel it pressing beneath my skin, like standing too close to electrical wires humming inside the walls. Then I noticed something carved into the wooden stage floor near the microphone stand. Symbols. Thin markings scratched deep into the wood. Most people would never have recognized them. But I did. Desert sigils. Spirit symbols older than Christianity. Older than Islam. Symbols used by wandering tribes who believed music could open doors between worlds. My stomach tightened the moment I saw them. Someone had carved an entire ritual circle beneath the stage itself. I touched one of the symbols carefully with my fingertips. The wood felt ice cold. Suddenly a voice behind me said, "Beautiful, aren't they?" I turned instantly. Isaiah Blue stood near the piano, wearing the same dark coat from the night before. In daylight his face appeared even stranger. Handsome in a terrible way. Ageless. Smooth dark skin stretched over sharp cheekbones, but his silver eyes looked ancient beyond understanding. "You should not touch those symbols, Mama Otomba," he said softly. "Some doors cannot be closed once opened." I rose slowly from the chair. "What do you want from Harlem?" Isaiah smiled faintly. "Music, and the missing people?" His expression remained calm. Every song requires an audience. Even now those words still haunt me. The club suddenly felt colder than winter. Somewhere in the building I heard faint whispering, although no one else seemed present. Isaiah stepped closer to the stage lights, and for one brief moment I saw shadows moving beneath his skin, like trapped figures struggling to escape. Faces. Human faces. Mouths silently screaming from inside him. Then the lights overhead flickered violently. When they steadied again, Isaiah stood farther away near the backstage curtain, though I never saw him move. "Tonight," he said quietly, "you should come hear me sing, Mama Otomba." His silver eyes locked onto mine. "After all, your grandmother once made a promise to the desert." Then he disappeared behind the curtain, leaving me alone inside the freezing silence of the Paradise Room. That night Harlem felt wrong from the moment darkness settled over the streets. Even the jazz drifting from the club sounded nervous, as though the musicians themselves sensed something terrible moving beneath the city. Fog rolled low across Lenox Avenue, while neon signs buzzed weakly above the sidewalks like dying stars. I arrived at the Paradise Room shortly before midnight, wearing my grandmother's protection beads beneath my coat, and carrying the small wooden idol hidden inside my purse. The club was already overflowing with people. White businessmen sat beside weary factory workers, elegant women in silk dresses smoked cigarettes beneath hanging lamps, and musicians crowded near the stage, whispering uneasily among themselves. Yet, despite the noise and laughter, fear lingered in the room like an invisible perfume. Everyone felt it. Nobody spoke of it. Curtis waited near the back wall looking pale and exhausted. The moment he saw me, he hurried close and gripped my arm tightly. "3 more people vanished since yesterday," he whispered. "One of the waitresses, a trumpet player, and the photographer's assistant, that one." I nodded silently. Deep inside I already knew the disappearances would continue until something stopped Isaiah Blue. Suddenly the lights dimmed throughout the club. Conversations faded almost instantly. The stage curtains trembled softly, though no wind touched them. Then Isaiah walked into the spotlight. Every person in the Paradise Room fell silent. He wore a black suit that shimmered strangely beneath the stage lights, and around his neck hung a silver chain marked with symbols I recognized from the ritual carved into the floorboards. But it was his eyes that froze the room. Silver eyes glowing faintly in the darkness like moonlight trapped inside human flesh. He stepped toward the microphone slowly, almost gracefully, and when he began to sing, the entire club seemed to stop breathing. I have heard great singers in my lifetime. I heard women in Harlem sing sorrow so beautifully it made strangers weep together. I heard gospel choirs shake church walls with voices full of heaven itself. But Isaiah's voice was something else entirely. Ancient. Endless. His songs slithered through the room like smoke entering lungs. Some people closed their eyes while listening. Others stared at him in a trance. I saw grown men crying silently into their drinks without understanding why. Then the shadows appeared. At first only I seemed to notice them. Thin dark shapes moving along the walls behind the audience. Tall figures with hollow faces and dragging chains. More and more emerged as Isaiah continued singing. The temperature inside the club dropped sharply until people rubbed their hands together against sudden cold. Frost crept slowly across whiskey glasses. Curtis whispered prayers beside me under his breath. Then Isaiah changed songs. The melody shifted into the burial hymn from my grandmother's village. My blood turned cold instantly, because this time the audience began singing with him. Not consciously. Their mouths simply opened together as though invisible strings controlled them. Men and women who did not know the language sang every word perfectly while staring forward with empty eyes. The shadows behind them grew darker and thicker until the walls themselves seemed alive. I realized then what Isaiah truly was. Not a man possessed by spirits. A doorway. A living doorway opened long ago through forbidden music somewhere deep in the desert where my grandmother once lived. She had spoken of wandering tribes who sacrificed voices to ancient beings hidden beneath the sand. Spirits that hungered for memory, grief, and song. Spirits that could never fully enter the world unless invited through music powerful enough to weaken the border between life and death. Isaiah had become that invitation. And Harlem, full of sorrow, loneliness, racism, broken dreams, and midnight jazz, had fed him perfectly. Suddenly Isaiah stopped singing and looked directly at me from the stage. The entire crowd turned toward me at the same moment with empty, expressionless faces. Even Curtis. Isaiah smiled softly. "Your grandmother promised us music generations ago," he said into the microphone. "Tonight the debt is paid." The shadows began moving toward the audience. Wherever they touched someone, the person simply vanished soundlessly into darkness. A woman disappeared beside the bar first, then a drummer near the stage. Panic finally exploded through the club as people screamed and rushed toward the exits, but the doors would not open. The shadows stretched across the walls like black rivers, swallowing bodies into nothingness. Curtis grabbed my shoulders desperately. "Mama, what do we do?" For one terrible moment I nearly lost hope. Then I remembered my grandmother's final lesson. Spirits crossing between worlds always require balance. An opening song. And a closing song. With shaking hands I removed the wooden idol from my purse and stepped toward the stage while chaos consumed the club around me. Isaiah watched calmly as I approached him through the freezing darkness. "You cannot close the door," he said gently. "Too many voices already belong to us." I lifted the idol toward him. "My grandmother lied to your spirits," I whispered. "She never promised music. She promised silence." Then I smashed the wooden figure against the stage floor. The idol split apart instantly. From inside it burst a cloud of pale gray ash that filled the air around Isaiah like smoke. For the first time, fear crossed his face. Real fear. The symbols carved into the stage began glowing violently beneath his feet. The shadows screamed. Not human screams. Ancient screams. Thousands of voices crying out together from somewhere beyond the world of the living. Isaiah staggered backward as silver light poured from his eyes and mouth. The audience collapsed unconscious across the floor, while the club shook like a ship caught in a storm. Then I began singing the final burial hymn my grandmother taught me as a child. The closing song. The song of sealed doors. Isaiah screamed as the shadows wrapped around him violently, pulling his body apart into swirling darkness and silver light. The stage cracked beneath him. The microphone exploded. Every lamp inside the Paradise Room burst simultaneously. And then suddenly everything stopped. Silence fell across the club. Complete silence. The cold vanished. The shadows disappeared. And where Isaiah Blue once stood, there remained only a black scorch mark burned deep into the wooden stage floor. The missing people never returned. Neither did Isaiah. The police blamed gas leaks and mass hysteria for what happened inside the Paradise Room that night. Newspapers called it a riot. Harlem moved on the way cities always do. But sometimes very late at night, when rain falls softly over Lenox Avenue and distant jazz drifts through the dark, I still hear singing beneath the streets. Soft singing. Patient singing. Waiting for another doorway to open. And every time I hear it, I remember the silver eyes of the jazz singer nobody could photograph.